Welcome classic rock fans, welcome Patreons to another episode of Beneath the Covers, and today we're looking at a very iconic album cover indeed. That is the London Calling by The Clash, which was released around about Christmas '79 in the UK, that was, about a month later in the USA. It's a wonderful, wonderful album cover, and I have to say a pretty remarkable thumbnail as well, if I may blow my own trumpet. And why not, it is a music related channel. This is truly a remarkable album for a number of reasons. It's one that breaks the mould of what we perceive as a punk album, but it's much, much more than that. If I may quote Wikipedia, if you'll forgive me for that, it's an album that is about effectively bridging a traditional punk rock sound and a new post-punk aesthetic. London Calling reflects the band's growing interest in styles beyond their punk roots, including reggae, rockabilly, ska, New Orleans R&B, pop, lounge, jazz and hard rock. It also includes themes of drug use, social displacement, and the responsibilities of adulthood. So you can see thematically there's definitely a maturing here from the usual vigour and spit of punk rock. This album is a very important album. It's a very important album cover. It's an album cover that perfectly captures the feral energy of rock and roll. And it's also befittingly a homage to another album sleeve that does just that, and that is the Elvis Presley debut album from 1956. But what is compelling about this album sleeve, it's not over-considered fantasy art by Roger Dean or some sort of artistic statement by Hypnosis. It symbolises destruction and frustration in a singular moment of rage and displacement. It's not the ritualistic sacrificial guitar burning we got with Jimmy at Monterey or the Who's excessive forays into auto-destructive art, but a singular moment caught without forethought or consideration. Also in that moment it perfectly epitomises the Clash's usual anti-authoritarian stance. The bass player, of course, featured on the cover, Paul Simonon, said that the act of violence was inspired by the fact that the bouncers at that particular concert would not allow the audience members to leave their seats and, properly participate in the show. And there are two people who are responsible for this iconic shot. The first person is Paul Simonon, who in that act of violence perfectly encaptures the frustration and anger and angst in the music, and British photographer Penny Smith, who accompanied the Clash on the US tour. Penny Smith had already made her name shooting for NME, of course. Interestingly, in an interview, Paul Simonon said that the show had gone quite well, but for me, inside me, it just wasn't working well, so I suppose I just took it out on the bass. When I look at it now, I wish I'd lifted my face up a bit more. Penny Smith has said she doesn't actually like this photograph. She was actually stepping away from Paul Simonon when she took the photograph. She was afraid she was going to get hurt or hit, I think, by him or the bass. As a result, the photograph is just a tad blurred. She always insists that there were much better photographs taken on that night and on that tour that could have been used. She actually went on to say in an interview, "I can't see that picture now. It's been used in various forms so many times it's a bit like wallpaper. Of all the Clash photos I took, there are others that perhaps I prefer for all sorts of reasons. But I rather like it. I think it perfectly suits the album and the music. The blurriness of it kind of feeds into the very murky quality and the danger of the music contained therein on the album. In one single shot, it beautifully represents all the anger and resentment bubbling beneath that whole punk movement. We don't need to see the snarling face of John Lydon. I think there's a saying, isn't there? A picture tells 1,000 words or something like that. Well, this picture perfectly represents everything about the late 70s, the frustration and rage that I think many, certainly in the younger generation, were feeling at the time, that sense of political disenfranchisement and a sense of alienation, especially alienated from all that progressive rock stuff that was noodling away in the early to mid-70s. I suppose with all the social strife at the time, they just somehow could not intellectually or emotionally connect with 30-year-old millionaires in capes. If we're talking about those that are responsible for this iconic album sleeve, we have to mention graphic designer Rob Lowry. Rob Lowry was interested in a pastiche or homage to another album sleeve that perfectly epitomises that feral energy of rock and roll. Although the original Elvis Presley sleeve was more a sexual energy than a destructive one, I think. Although perhaps seen as very destructive by the older generation of 1956, who could say. But that's the original Elvis Presley sleeve. I'm sure you have this album. It's emulated the same colours and print, and it contains that same in-the-moment shot that snapshot that epitomises rock and roll. And the colours and the text on the London Calling album perfectly copies the Elvis album with those garish pop art, pink and green. Has a vulgarity to it, which is maybe the point, I don't know. Paul Simonon said that when that Elvis record came out, rock and roll was still dangerous. And as a final footnote to this wonderful album sleeve, it was produced in 2010 by the Royal Mail as a commemorative stamp. Who would have thought today the Clash album cover as a stamp with the Queen's head on it? Seems so wrong somehow. Anyway, you've been watching an episode of Beneath the Covers from my Patreon. I just want to thank you all for your support and hope that you continue to do so throughout 2021. The next video for my Patreon will be my exclusive Patreon-only album review, which this month is on Roger Waters. And I've got some great suggestions for you, which will be floated in the form of a poll just after I upload that one. Anyway, thank you so much. Hope you're staying safe, keeping warm, but more importantly, please do keep listening.